Sometimes the stories we grow up hearing feel like fragments of fantasy, tales whispered by firelight, too incredible to be true. But what if one day, buried beneath the soil of an old farm, you uncover a secret that makes you question everything you thought you knew? A father, a son, and a discovery that turns their quiet lives upside down. Welcome, and let's unravel a story that begins where the earth meets the unknown. A memory came flooding back to Danny about the stories his grandfather used to tell him when he was a young boy. His grandfather recalled the time a great fireball fell from the sky and landed on their farm. Despite Danny's admiration for the stories, he considered them to be merely fiction concocted by his grandfather with wit. Most of the renovations had been completed. Nothing could stop the dynamic duo of father and son from achieving great things together. Their home now had a new feature that they were proud of. It was then that the problems began. It was obvious that something was wrong when Danny heard his father's excavator start shrieking mechanically. As soon as Hector turned off the machine, he hopped down. It was impossible for him to get the digger out of the hole. Upon inspecting his equipment, Hector discovered that it had been mangled beyond repair. There had been a hard impact. Danny also took a closer look now that the equipment had been safely switched off. It was a moment of disbelief for both of them. Under the soil where they planned to build their deck, they found something shiny and metallic that had been eroded by decades. With a shovel in hand, Hector quickly turned to an old-school method. As his son watched him dig around the artifact, he could see the excitement in his eyes, but they had no idea what trouble they would face. As Danny discovered something about the wreck after an hour of digging, his excitement turned to horror. A mysterious object protruded from the wreckage, but they weren't supposed to see it. Hector's mind was filled with alarm bells. Regardless of whether the FBI had already learned of the incident, he knew that they would be involved. What would his discovery lead to? According to Hector Nielsen, his life was like winning the lottery. After reflecting on everything he had done up to this point, he wouldn't change a thing. It was all because of his beautiful wife and son that he had such an amazing life. As a family farm inheritor, he felt fortunate. Just like his predecessors, he cared for and maintained it. However, he had no idea what lay beneath his house. At 12, Danny, Hector's son, began to show an interest in the family farm. In order to learn how he maintained their plots, Hector brought him out. But Danny was more enamored with one project than all the others. Of all the things he was interested in, his dad proposed that they work together on a special project. It would be a good way for them to bond. Hector suggested building a new deck attached to the house. Danny immediately jumped up and down at the idea. Fortunately, they already owned the equipment due to the farm. It was just a matter of getting the materials. However, it was unclear what the duo would find. Danny surveyed the area they were supposed to excavate. His assumption was that shovels would be used. His attention was drawn to the sheds when he heard a rumbling. A loud rumbling echoed as he saw his father's digger cresting over the hill and stopping in front of his house. It was apparent to the little boy that they were using sophisticated tools. As his eyes grew wide, the situation was about to take a dark turn. Hector dropped the scoop into the soft soil after positioning the well-oiled machine over the patch of land. A massive amount of dirt was ripped out with every scoop by the teeth as they dug hungrily into the earth. As Danny stood stunned, he wondered how something so efficient could exist. He suddenly remembered something he'd forgotten until now. There was something familiar about the soil, and that's when it clicked in his brain. His grandfather had mentioned it before he passed away years ago, but the stories he told lived on. It was strange that Danny had forgotten them until this moment. Memories of sitting around the fireplace flooded his mind, but was there any truth to any of his stories? His grandfather said he remembered when a great fireball came down from the heavens and landed on their farm. It was some kind of winged firebird, making their farm its burial site. Danny used to love the stories, but that's all they were to him, just fiction made up by his grandfather's quick-witted mind. The story left Danny's mind as quickly as it had entered it. The duo got stuck into the rhythm of digging, with Hector on the machine and Danny measuring out the wood they bought. With a little bit of elbow grease, they had managed to get far in their endeavor. They just had to dig the rest of the foundation, but things wouldn't go to plan. The renovations were most of the way done. The dynamic duo of father and son meant nothing could stop what they could achieve together. They were proud of the new feature they were adding to their home, but that's when the problem started. Danny watched as his father's excavator made a mechanical shriek, indicating that something was very wrong. Hector quickly turned the machine off and hopped down. He couldn't get the digger out of the hole. What had happened to it? When Hector inspected his equipment, he noticed that it was mangled beyond repair. It had hit something hard. Now that the equipment was safely off, Danny took a closer look too. Hector would have cursed if his son wasn't around. He couldn't believe that he had damaged his precious digger. It would probably cost him a fortune to have it replaced. But then a question popped into his head. What was hard enough to do so much damage to his digger? He knew that the soil there was anything but rocky. The truth was going to change everything. The duo stared down in disbelief. Right underneath where they planned to lay their deck, they saw something shiny and metallic, eroded by decades underneath the soil. Hector quickly went to a more old-school method and grabbed a shovel. He saw the excitement on his son's face as he started digging around the artifact they had found, but they had no idea what trouble they would get into for it. After an hour of digging, Danny's excitement turned to horror as he noticed something about the wreck they had uncovered. There was something sticking out of the wreckage, but it wasn't something they were supposed to see. Alarm bells went off in Hector's mind. He knew that the FBI would be involved if they hadn't already somehow found out. While digging, Hector uncovered something he never expected to find. His shovel brushed against something solid, so he carefully uncovered it. All he saw was a bony hand sticking out of the soil. Was this an old Halloween prank or something much more sinister? Hector's pace quickened as he started digging deeper and deeper. The hand belonged to an arm that seemed trapped underneath more metal. This was the hard object they had hit. But what was it? Before doing anything else, Hector decided to try and make sure he wasn't incriminated. But in trying to do the responsible thing, he marked himself for danger. He grabbed his phone out of his pocket and called 911. He reported the old and decrepit body he'd found, but he had no idea that they were going to send in everything they had. Unbeknownst to Hector, they had a policy that meant they had to hand over such an old body to their higher-ups. This meant the police washed their hands of the matter and informed a much more serious department. Meanwhile, Hector's morbid curiosity had gotten the best of him. He kept digging out his discovery inch by inch. Danny told him to stop. With every inch uncovered, he understood more of the bigger picture. He needed answers before the police arrived, but he was running out of time. That's when he finally found the marking. It was hard to make out on the corroded steel, but there was definitely a telltale sign of what the object was. Based on the insignia, it was clearly from a long time ago, and it was definitely military. He could make out the iron cross amongst the metal. This changed things. He knew exactly where it came from. It must have been a plane from World War II that crashed on the farm at some point. It explained the jacket the skeleton was wearing, but his celebration was cut short by the sound of engines. In a matter of moments, he saw his farm get surrounded by unmarked black cars. Men got out of the cars and approached him. "Is this where the body is, sir?" one man asked. The men quickly conducted an investigation with their own tools and team. All the while, Hector stood by the wreck, worried to the bone. Was he going to get in trouble for this? The men in suits wanted an explanation from the farmer. Why was this body on his farm? But then an unlikely savior came from the house to explain what was going on. Hector stared at the men, sweat dripping down his brow. Then he heard a small voice behind him. "I know everything. Granddad told me it was the truth. I even found the story he wrote down." Danny was there to save the day. He was holding an old journal in his hand that was clearly generations old. But would it be good enough for the men? Danny's face beamed as he started paring the dusty journal in his hands. February 3rd, 1944. A fireball came crashing down on the farm tonight. It must have been a Messerschmitt Bf 109 from the markings. The German troops might come looking to recover it, but I have no idea. I'll turn this into a story to tell my son and my grandson one day." The men surprisingly listened to the boy's story. They asked if they could borrow the journal as a means to find out more about the soldier that had died in the aircraft. They'd make copies and give them back. Hector was more than willing to hand the old thing over, not wanting any trouble. The men seemed satisfied with that and decided to leave after spending some time excavating the rest of the plane. After the men had taken the plane, Danny and Hector stared down at the hole in the ground that was left. That's when they realized that most of the work had been done for them. Danny's eyes flickered with excitement once again. He saw the hole in the ground and the wood. They could now continue with their land. Despite the unexpected hiccup and the run-in with the police, Danny told his dad that it only brought them closer together. The two managed to finish the deck in a few weeks and thought about what else could be buried underneath their noses. Danny started taking more of an interest in farming, and Hector trained him to be a worthy successor for the Nielsen farm. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.